Welcome back to another baseball focus college baseball video. We are in the home stretch here in the college baseball regular season, going over week 13 this week, top 25 update, and doing another field of 64 projection. We got one weekend left in the regular season for college baseball. Definitely goes by way too fast. I think I said it last week that regular season in college baseball is only 60 games compared to the MLB season being 162. So it feels like just a very small chunk in the baseball calendar is college baseball season. So a lot packed in there in just a couple months and kind of getting to the, down here to the end where it gets exciting. So a lot of playoff implications this past weekend, a lot of playoff implications going into this next weekend, which we'll talk about. Had three newcomers on the top 25, some shuffling down the board as well as on the field of 64. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. Here's my updated top 25. Did have a little bit of shakeup within the top five. So as you can see, if you can see my screen here, UCLA sticks at number one. They did finally lose a game in the Big Ten, and I talked last week about the fact that all season I didn't think that they were going to run the table in the Big Ten, and then coming up into this weekend, I think them going undefeated in the Big Ten is much more realistic, even though they were going up against Oregon, which is arguably the next best team in the Big Ten. But the way that they had just kind of dominated other Big Ten opponents, the fact that they swept USC earlier in the season, I was pretty confident that they were going to sweep Oregon, and they were playing at home as well. But Oregon steals that second game of the series, and then almost wins that final. I mean, they were up 6-1 in the final game of that series. I believe it was 6-1. Oregon was leading, so there was definitely a world in which Oregon comes away with the series win on the road at UCLA. But honestly, not even sure I'd move UCLA out of that number one spot if that was the case, just because of the overall resume for UCLA is just way too good. They're definitely it's not a matter of, I don't think that they're within the same tier as these teams below them. I think they are in a tier of their own. So they would probably have to lose back-to-back weeks. So they do secure their Big Ten regular season conference championship, and pretty much lock down that number one overall seed in the tournament. So they remain at number one. North Carolina, so Texas was at 2 coming into the weekend, which seemed to not be as consensus as I thought it was. I feel like I might have actually been the only top 25 with Texas still at 2, but they kind of helped me out there by going on the road and dropping 2-3 from Tennessee. So they fall out of the 2 spot and fall to 5. Gives way to North Carolina to jump up to 2. North Carolina took on Pitt at home, swept Pitt. In a series I was a little closer than the final result says. Pitt was kind of in each game at some point. And Pitt, kind of a fringe top 25 team for a couple weeks. So that was enough. It was enough for them to keep them over Georgia Tech, since North Carolina does still have that head-to-head over Georgia Tech. So North Carolina up at 2. Georgia Tech jumps up to 3 from 4. Sweeps Duke over the weekend. I was at the game on Friday night, the only close game in this series. Georgia Tech wins in walk-off fashion in extra innings. A lot of fun. That Duke team is interesting because I would have been interested to see what they had done this year if they could have actually pitched. Their offense really impressed me in that game because, Georgia Tech kind of has their trademark Georgia Tech innings where they just, 4th, 5th, 6th inning, in the middle of the game, they put up a crooked number and they just kind of run away with it. And that kind of happened. I think it was the 5th inning in that game. They hit 3 home runs and they're up. I think they're up 7-1 at one point. And then a couple innings later, you look up at the scoreboard and Duke takes I think they took an 8-7 lead. So that offense just kept coming. But we're not here to talk about Duke. We're here to talk about teams that are actually in the top 25. So Georgia Tech moves up to 3. Their only series loss on the season is to North Carolina. So I still project Georgia Tech they'll be at Boston College this weekend, and I believe they only need to win one to secure that ACC regular season title. So I still project on them winning the ACC regular season title and probably the ACC tournament as well. But as it stands now, and this will kind of show up down the board here in a minute too. Is if I believe two teams are close enough to each other and they have head to head, I'm going to take the team that has the head to head. North Carolina currently has the head to head over Georgia Tech. But I do project Georgia Tech a little better, and that will also show up in my Field of 64 projection when we get to it. Georgia secures the SEC regular season title. That's why they jump over Texas, and why Texas falls to 5. So Georgia, the top-ranked SEC team, they sweep LSU at home. Not necessarily a tall task this year, but is enough for them to jump Texas. And then Texas's fall stops at 5. That's Texas' second series loss on the season, the other being to Texas A&M. It's not necessarily a terrible series loss considering Tennessee's like fringe top 25 team now. I know there's plenty of top 25s that had Tennessee make it on this week. Tennessee's just right outside on the bubble for me. So they do go to Tennessee and get 1. So it's not, a back-breaking series loss by any means for Texas. But it was enough for Georgia to make that leap over them. And then that's also kind of where Auburn gets screwed a little bit because Auburn goes on the road and beats Mississippi State, not an easy place to win a series. And they actually stick at 6. They stay right there at 6. So it was just kind of a matter of Auburn not having anywhere to go. And then you also add on the fact that Texas beat Auburn in a weekend series at Auburn earlier in the season. So another one of those cases where two teams close enough, the head-to-head comes in. So I still feel comfortable keeping Texas above Auburn. Oregon State sticks at 7. They go 4-0 on the week. Every game on the road. It was at Portland and then 3 games at Long Beach State. So kind of another weaker week in terms of schedule-wise for Oregon State, which has kind of been the case for them all season because they're not in conference. But they take care of business, stick at 7. And then Oregon sticks at 8. This is a rare case where a team loses their weekend, but they don't move down. Oregon, I was really impressed by the fact that the first game, I think it was 11-1 in the first game that they lost to UCLA. But then, obviously, they take that game too, and that was a game that they had to come back. So Oregon comes back against UCLA in that Saturday game, and then had it not been for UCLA coming back on Sunday's game, Oregon was up 6-1. Oregon comes away with a road series win at UCLA, which would have been the best series win of any team in the nation all season. So I felt confident with keeping Oregon at 8, and especially considering how they've been the last couple of weeks, the way they've been trending. Kept them at 8. USC jumps within the top 10 for the first time in a couple weeks. They had kind of been floating around the mid-teens for a little bit, and then the last couple of weeks have pushed a little bit. They go 4-0 on the week. It was a non-conference week for them. They got a midweek over Cal State Fullerton, and then they swept Nevada, which Nevada was a tournament team for a couple weeks out of the Mountain West. Still not a tournament team now. Could still win that Mountain West Conference. But still a decent week for USC, especially considering they went undefeated on the week, so they jump into the top 10. West Virginia had the biggest series win. They go 4-0 on the week to get win a midweek against Marshall, and then they go on the road to Kansas, who Kansas was for 3 or 4 weeks there was the hottest team in the nation. Went from unranked all the way into my top 10. I had them ranked 10 coming into the week. Now they're down to 18 after losing this series. But and Kansas was unbeatable at home as well. West Virginia goes in there and sweeps them, so they're able to push up to 10. Probably would have gone higher in a couple different weeks, but the fact that most of these teams above them didn't do anything to warrant them dropping. So West Virginia, they climbed 5 spots to 10. And actually backtracking on that, Oregon at 8, USC at 9 also sets up for a fun series this weekend because USC will be traveling to Oregon this weekend, which is a big opportunity for USC because they've obviously done a lot of winning. You look at their 41-12 record there, but they haven't done much winning against good competition. So this will kind of be a chance for them to prove that they could potentially be a host in the tournament. Right now, I don't have them as a host, but we'll get to that later. So West Virginia at 10. Southern Miss pushes up to 11. They kind of benefit from Kansas falling as well as Coastal Carolina, which we'll get to here in a moment. Southern sweeps their series at James Madison, so they are now they've now overtaken Coastal Carolina as the top mid-major in the country and in the Sun Belt. They've just looked really good the last couple of weeks, so they climb it a little bit. Florida jumps all the way from 17 to 12, so they take the same jump that West Virginia takes after winning against Kansas on the road. So Florida, they beat Kentucky at home, but what happened for Florida was the fact that, okay, they jumped Coastal Carolina and Kansas, and then you essentially they were close enough to Florida State to where, and Florida State was able to jump up to 13 from 16. Florida was close enough to Florida State where now I'm like, okay, the fact that Florida beat Florida State 3 times in the midweek, chalk that up to a 3-game midweek series. Now that actually means something, and so I'm going to give the nod to Florida over Florida State and put them at 12. And you also account for the fact, I mean, this is more relevant within the field of 64 projection, but the fact that Florida has the second most quad 1 wins in the nation at 15, it's like, okay, yeah, they should probably be at least a top 15 team. So I mean, the weekend, they go 3-1 on the week. They beat North Florida in the midweek, and then they beat Kentucky 2-1 at home. So I mean, it's not necessarily a statement week, but it was enough for them to inch up a little bit, and then that head-to-head came into play. So Florida is able to jump up to 12, which is my highest ranking of them since probably, I think after they beat Miami that week on the road early in the season. I think I had them as high as 6. This might be the highest I've had them since then. And then Florida State at 13. They take 2 or 3 from Clemson on the road. Another one where it's not really a statement series win, but good enough for them to move up. And then Arkansas is going to jump Mississippi State and Texas A&M. Mississippi State falls from 12 to 15 after dropping series to Auburn at home. That's another series where it's like, okay, Auburn's a top team in the nation, top 3 team in the SEC. It does come at home as well in the way, Mississippi State at 12. Probably a toss-up series. Maybe Mississippi State's a favorite in that one. So they don't fall super far. They fall 3 spots, but they do give way to Arkansas, who, another one, Arkansas has a series win over Mississippi State. Arkansas beats Oklahoma 2-1 at home. Texas A&M falls from 14 to 16. They fall 2 spots. So Southern Miss had separated Mississippi State and Texas A&M coming into the week. Southern Miss jumps a few spots. Now Mississippi State, Texas A&M were together, and then they fell together. So Mississippi State falls 3, Texas A&M falls 2. A&M goes on the road, loses 2-3 to Ole Miss. They do win their midweek, so they finish 2-2 on the week. But, it's another one. It's on the road. Ole Miss is ranked 21 in the nation now for me. They were outside the top 25 coming into the week. But it's another one where it's like, not a back-breaking series loss by any means. They just fall 2. And then, so here at 17 and 18, Coastal Carolina and Kansas came into the week ranked back-to-back with each other. Coastal at 9, Kansas at 10. Both of them fall 8 spots. So Kansas goes 0-4 on the week. Coastal goes 1-3. Coastal drops a series at home to Old Dominion, which is not a good look at all by any means. And then Kansas drops a series at home. So both drop series at home. Kansas drops series at home to West Virginia. So I kind of felt like the weekends were a wash between Coastal Carolina and Kansas. Both were at home. Coastal doesn't get swept, but it's by a lower level mid-major team. Kansas gets swept by a top 25 team. So I feel like that kind of evens out in a sense. And then Coastal gets beat at home by Clemson in the midweek. Kansas goes on the road and gets beat by Creighton in the midweek. So almost another wash because, Coastal's opponent better than Creighton, but it came at home. So I felt like the weeks were pretty comparable with each other. So I felt like they just kind of fall together. Nebraska jumps up 2 spots, 21-19. They stay at home and sweep Iowa. Alabama moves up 3 spots. Alabama went on the road to South Carolina, swept them. Ole Miss gets back on after beating Texas A&M at home 2-1. And then Boston College had a very weird week. They stick at 22, but they played New Jersey Tech at home. New Jersey Tech I know that they are pretty simply put, they're one of the worst teams in the nation. I don't remember exactly where they are in the RPI, but it's like in the 290s. And they split 2 games with New Jersey Tech. So on one hand, it's like, okay, why is it top 25 teams kind of inexcusable losing to, a New Jersey Tech? But at the same time, it's just 2 games. They split. What are you going to do about it? So Boston College, I just don't really know what to do with them. Just kind of stick at 22. Jacksonville State jumps up 2 spots after beating Kennesaw State 2 games to 1. I believe they secured the CUSA Conference Championship regular season title. And then Oklahoma State and Cincinnati are my 2 newcomers, and this is their debuts on my top 25 as well. So Oklahoma State has been hot, been very sneaky the last couple of weeks over there in the Big 12. 16-11 in the Big 12 now, and they went on the road to Arizona State where they took 2 of 3, which is why Arizona State falls out after finally making their debut last week. But Arizona falls out, losing to an unranked at home. Now ranked 24, Oklahoma State. And then Cincinnati, another Big 12 team. Cincinnati goes 3-1 on the week. They beat Oral Roberts on the road in the midweek, and then they go to Kansas State and win 2 of 3. Another situation where these 2 teams, Big 12, pretty comparable resumes, but Oklahoma State did sweep Cincinnati earlier in the season at home. So Oklahoma State gets the nod over Cincinnati as the number 24, Cincinnati 25. So Arizona State falls off. Oklahoma's another team that falls off. I think they've lost 3 series in a row. They just lost to Arkansas. And then your final team that fell off was Virginia. Virginia drops 2 of 3 from Cal at home. And Virginia's now sub 500 in the ACC. And I'm a stickler about teams being like, the record has to look right for you to be in the top 25. I'm not going to, regardless of the conference, I don't feel comfortable about putting a team in the top 25 that has a sub 500 record in their conference. Virginia has that now, and it was also a bad series loss, losing at home to Cal, who's one of the worst teams in the ACC this year. So, and Virginia was at 19, and so you kind of look at the falls that Kansas Coastal Carolina make. Kansas drops 8 for losing to a top 25 team at home. Virginia being at 19, dropping to a not very good program at home was certainly enough for them to fall out of the top 25. So Virginia's out. So that's your top 25 there. Your newcomers, Ole Miss, this might be their 3rd time coming back onto the top 25, but Oklahoma State and Cincinnati are your true newcomers there. And then you got Virginia, Oklahoma, and Arizona State falling out. With that being said, we can move over to Field of 64 time. So in this newest edition of the Field of 64, we had 7 teams fall out, 7 newcomers. 4 of those were auto bids. We had 4 different auto bids, and then 3 changes to the at-larges. The only changes, so the top 8 national seeds, I made 1 change in the top. There was I did some shuffling in terms of seeding, but I did have 1 change in terms of teams represented within the top 8. Kansas was my 7 seed. They fell out of the top 8 for me. They are still a host. And then I put Southern Miss in there as a top 8 seed. It kind of came down to a few teams for me for that final spot within the top 8. I gave Southern Miss the nod. What it kind of came down to me is they are number 1 in non-conference RPI, 14th in strength of schedule, 8-7 Q1. The thing, kind of what sticks out to me is the fact that Southern Miss is 1 game back of Coastal Carolina. In the Sun Belt regular season standings. Coastal has to go on the road to Louisiana this weekend, and Southern Miss gets to stay home against Georgia Southern. So I'm pretty confident in the fact that Southern Miss is going to sweep that series, which puts the pressure on Coastal to win at least 2 of those games against Louisiana. And Louisiana they're not just going to roll over to Coastal Carolina. Louisiana has some good wins on the season. And I also think about the fact that Southern Miss has been playing a lot better than Coastal Carolina, and they bring that momentum into the Sun Belt tournament. Let's say Southern Miss wins the regular season Sun Belt and also the Sun Belt tournament. I think it would be hard to leave them out of the top 8 seed, considering, once you get to that I think the top 7 teams in the top 8 are pretty set in stone. And then you got 4 or 5 teams that are kind of like on the fringe there, like they could do it depending on how this last weekend and then also your conference tournament shakes out. But I think what Southern Miss has in front of them, I feel most confident in Southern Miss securing that final top 8 seed. So that's why they take Kansas' spot. And then outside of the top 8, your final 8 seeds, I dropped Coastal Carolina from hosting, and I also dropped Mississippi State from hosting. And they were replaced with Oregon and Nebraska. So Oregon I have up there at 12. What it came down for me with Oregon is the fact that they're sitting at 19 in the RPI at the moment, but they have USC this weekend. I mentioned that in the top 25 update. And the way Oregon is playing, and also you account for the fact that USC has not looked good against, opponents on the same level, top 25 teams. I think Oregon can come away with a series sweep against USC. And if they do that, then you're looking at 21-9 in the Big Ten. And I think with that, also with having a big series win at the end of the season, and potentially having the chance to upset a UCLA in the Big Ten tournament, I like Oregon's chances at securing a hosting bid at this point. Even if they take 2 or 3 from USC, if they sweep, I think you could say that they're a lock to be a host there. So, and then Nebraska kind of gets in by default. They're USC I considered, but they have 0 quad 1 wins. They're 0-8 in quad 1. Mississippi State I thought about keeping in there. But they're sub 500 in quad 1, 9-11. Ole Miss the same thing, sub 500 in quad 1. So just not quite enough there for me to like any of their chances. Nebraska's 9-7 in quad 1, and they've already got 20 wins in the Big Ten. So I think that's the safest. That was the safest team for me as far as getting in as a host as well. And then Jacksonville State, I still have hosting. I kind of seem like the only one that has Jacksonville State as a host. I've said it multiple times, but I think if Conference USA is getting 3 teams in the tournament, which I think that's pretty consensus, Jacksonville State, Missouri State, and Liberty, if all 3 of those teams get in, I do think that the best team from that conference should have a chance to host, especially considering the fact that it's been kind of hard finding 16 truly deserving teams to get a hosting bid. And Jacksonville State, they are 32 in the RPI, but they have as many conference wins as anybody else in the nation. I mean, UCLA 26 conference wins, Georgia Tech 22 conference wins, Georgia 21 conference wins, and then Jacksonville State's got 22. So they're 3rd in the nation in conference wins, and I know it's not super comparable considering Conference USA to, SEC, ACC, Big Ten. But I still think that's a strong conference, especially considering the fact that you're going to get 3 teams into the tournament. So I still like Jacksonville State to host. Jacksonville State does have to go on the road to play Dallas Baptist, which for Dallas Baptist, this is kind of like a last-ditch effort for them. Dallas Baptist is at 75 in the RPI, so I mean, if they sweep Jacksonville State, then maybe there's a conversation about Dallas Baptist as an at-large, but at this point, they're just going to have to win the tournament for them to get in. And if Jacksonville State takes 2 or 3 there, then you're looking at a 24-16 in conference. And I just don't know. I wouldn't feel comfortable leaving them out of a hosting bid in that case. So Jacksonville State still in. Kansas State, I still have them in as a host. They dropped to 13. I think I had them as my number 7 seed within the top 8 last week. West Virginia 11, Texas A&M, Alabama. I still have hosting. Alabama, is a team that's lower on my top 25, but you still look at the overall resume, and they are 6th in the RPI. They have 12 quad 1 wins. Number 4 strength of schedule. 6th in non-conference RPI. So Alabama definitely host. And honestly, I was considering them for a top 8 seed as well. But they've also been kind of a tougher team to project week to week. And they are playing Ole Miss this weekend, so that's easily a series they can either sweep or get swept. So I didn't feel super confident about them getting in as a top 8. And then kind of the one slight edge Southern Miss has over Alabama too is that they do have one head-to-head midweek win over Alabama. So I think if it was a toss-up between those two, I think that's probably enough to look at it and say, okay, we can get Southern Miss in as a top 8 seed. Some of the auto bids here. So some of the changes in terms of auto bids. High Point swept Winthrop last week. So High Point is in sole possession of the Big South. They also could potentially be an at-large if they are not to win that conference tournament. They are 40 in the RPI at the moment. Southern Illinois Edwardsville swept Eastern Illinois, who was the auto bid last week. They move into that top spot in the Ohio Valley. They do play Southeast Missouri this week. I believe I had Southeast Missouri in 2 weeks ago, and last week Eastern Illinois was the auto bid there. But you do want to look out for Southeast Missouri, 51 in the RPI. They play Little Rock this weekend, which is another team not at the top of that conference, but 2 games back of SIUE in the Ohio Valley. So they sweep that series. Potentially they have an at-large case if they're not to win that conference. Then you had Yale overtake Penn in the Ivy League, which is a tournament that kicks off this weekend, I believe. Yeah, Yale has a half-game lead over Penn. They swept Dartmouth over the weekend, and they also swept Penn head-to-head earlier in the season. Yeah, and that conference tournament is this weekend, so we'll have more clarity on the playoff picture next weekend because some of these conferences will have already decided their champions. And then in the Patriot League, that is a tournament that has actually already started. They started this past weekend, and they're finishing this weekend. So Army was the auto bid out of that conference last week, but you had Bucknell took down Navy in the semifinal, and then Holy Cross beat Army in their semi. So you have Holy Cross and Bucknell facing off this weekend for the Patriot League Championship. Definitely gonna be trying to tune into that as much as I can. It'll be a 3-game series this weekend. They did play against each other in the regular season. It was a 4-game series, and they split. So that's kind of a toss-up. Bucknell is 145 in the RPI to Holy Cross is 214. So Bucknell is probably going to be the favorite there. So they are the auto bid. They get in over Army. And then you had in the Big West, UC Santa Barbara was an at-large this week they are an auto bid. Last week they were an at-large because last week Cal Poly was leading that conference as an auto bid. UC Santa Barbara overtakes them in the standings this past weekend. So Cal Poly not good enough to be an at-large. So now the Big West looks like a 1-bid league. And so Cal Poly drops out. And then your other 2 at-larges that fall out are Kentucky and NC State. Just 2 teams that it's kind of interesting because once you get down into these, last 4 in, last 4 out, it's tough because it's hard finding teams deserving of kind of those last couple of spots. Kentucky is 12-15 in the SEC, and they're at home against Arkansas this weekend. If they win that series, they come out 14-16, which I think, considering it's a softer bubble this year, I think that could get the job done to get them in the tournament. But at the same time, they lose that series, then you're looking at 13-17, and there might be a couple more mid-majors in here that's a little more deserving of them. And then NC State falls out as well, who's at 42 in the RPI. But they are 13-14 in the ACC, but they got to go to North Carolina this weekend. I would put my money on North Carolina sweeping that series. And then you also look at the fact that North Carolina State's non-conference strength schedule, 231, and then they're also 5-9 in Quad 1. So there's not enough there for me to feel confident about putting them in, again, over some of these other teams that may be a little more deserving. So Kentucky and NC State are out for me. And then the at-larges that take their place are TCU, who, surprisingly enough, because TCU has felt very underwhelming all season, TCU is 16-11 in the Big 12, sitting at 44 in the RPI. They are 5-10 against Quad 1. But, you look at, TCU 16-11 now. And they do have to go on the road to West Virginia this weekend, which, the way West Virginia looks right now, TCU might get swept in that series. But at the same time, you steal one there, maybe you win the series there. You're coming out with maybe I would say they take one there. Then you have 17 wins in the Big 12. I think that's enough for you to get them there. And then Texas State, kind of this last spot was interesting for me because Texas State is sub 500 in the Sun Belt right now, which I think at the end of the season, I don't think I would put a sub 500 Sun Belt in, regardless of how good I think the Sun Belt is. But Texas State, they did just beat Baylor in the midweek, and then they went on the road and swept Arkansas State. So, I mean, and then they got Marshall over the weekend. So they sweep that, then they're 16-14 in the Sun Belt, and there just wasn't really anybody else I could find to put them in over Texas State. So, I mean, Pittsburgh at 45 in the RPI, but 10-17 in the ACC. Louisiana 14-13 in the Sun Belt, but they have to face Coastal this weekend. So I don't feel super confident about them coming out on the other side of that above 500. Southeast Missouri, 51 in the RPI, but have only played 2 quad 1 games. And then it just really thins out from there. So Texas State kind of backs into the tournament in a sense, just because couldn't find anybody better to put them in. And then Purdue as well. Purdue, another team that has sneakily just put together a really good season, 18-9 in the Big Ten. Regardless of what happens this weekend against Iowa, I still think that's plenty enough to get them in. So those are your new teams within the tournament. TCU, Texas State, Purdue as your at-larges, and then your auto bids, High Point, Southern Illinois, Edwardsville, Yale, and Bucknell. And then you also had Miami, Ohio, and Kent State flipped for me. Last week, Kent State was my auto bid out of the Mid-American, and then I had Miami, Ohio in as an at-large. Miami, Ohio, and Kent State are tied in the Mid-American now. Miami, Ohio sweeps their weekend. Kent State takes 2 of 3 in their weekend. So they pull into a tie, but Miami, Ohio does have a head-to-head over Kent State. They're also higher than Kent State in the RPI. Miami, Ohio 41, Kent State 55. So Miami, Ohio gets the auto bid. For me, gets the auto bid there. Kent State does remain as an at-large. So they flip in terms of at-large, auto bid. Just running through these conferences real quick. And just a couple of notes to keep track of this weekend. Some playoff implication stuff. Western Carolina still my auto bid out of the Southern. They're 53 in the RPI. Mercer is right behind them at 38 in the RPI. They're actually tied in the conference. Western Carolina does have the head-to-head over Mercer. And Mercer is a team that I just left out. They are 38 in the RPI, but the fact that they have 0 quad 1 wins, they're 0-7 in quad 1, and then 2-2 in quad 2, so 2-9 in quad 1, quad 2. They are 12-6 in the SoCon, but just not enough for me to get them in. They're going to have to win their conference tournament to get in. But then on the flip side, if they do that, I think Western Carolina does have a shot at making it as an at-large. 53 in the RPI, 2-3 quad 1, but 10-7 quad 2. So 12-10 there in quad 1, quad 2. Also 12-6 in the SoCon. In the Western, Tarleton State is my only team getting in from that conference. Cal Baptist was like very fringe, at large. They are going to finish the season with, I believe maybe top 5 in wins of all mid-majors. But the quality of the schedule has not been great, and then they just lost 2 or 3 at home to Sacramento State, which kind of just ends their chances at an at-large. They do go to UC Santa Barbara this weekend and UC Davis. So, I mean, I think it would take a miracle at this point to get Cal Baptist in, unless they win their conference tournament. And then Sacramento State is a funny case because they're not going to get into the tournament unless they win their conference tournament. But that's kind of a team that's played spoiler this weekend. This year. They spoiled Cal Baptist. They had that road series win at LSU earlier in the season. And then they're going to have another chance here this weekend because they're going to play Tarleton State, who is my auto bid out of that conference. So they beat Tarleton State, and then there's more chaos there in the Western caused by Sacramento State. In the Southland, Southeast Louisiana still is the auto bid there. They win the regular season title. They got their conference tournament this weekend. San Diego State remains in control of the Mountain West. Washington State and Air Force are only a game and a half back of them, but they do hold the head-to-head. San Diego State holds the head-to-head over both of them. Campbell continues to dominate the Coastal. No questions there. In the Big East, you have St. John's, UConn, and Xavier all tied at the top of that conference. St. John's 104 in the RPI, UConn 80, Xavier 65. So it's probably going to be a one big conference. But St. John's, even though St. John's has the lowest RPI of the three, they have the head-to-head over both UConn and Xavier. So that should be a fun finish there and a competitive conference tournament. Gonzaga still controls the West Coast. North Florida still controls the ASUN. St. Joe's still at the top of the A10. Binghamton still at the top of American East. Then you have the Missouri Valley. Indiana State, Illinois, Chicago, and Murray State. I believe they were all tied coming into the weekend last week. Indiana State does have head-to-head over UIC, and then also took 2 of 3 on the road at Murray State to push Murray State back, so Indiana State is still in control of the auto bid there. And then in the MAAC, Niagara and Rider are still both tied atop that conference, but Niagara still has the head-to-head over Rider, which was still the case last week. And then Fairfield has pulled within one game in that conference, so should be another fun conference tournament there. Wright State still controls the Horizon, Oral Roberts still in control of the Summit, Bethune-Cookman still in control of the SWAC. And then in the Northeast, you do have Fairleigh Dickinson and Long Island tied at the top of that conference. Fairleigh Dickinson came into the weekend one game above Long Island. Fairleigh Dickinson wins 2 of 3 over the weekend. Long Island sweeps. So now they are tied in that conference, and they play each other this weekend, which will be a lot of fun in the weakest conference in the NCAA. So if you're a college baseball sicko, that's a series to tune into. And then just taking a look at the rest of the board, nothing much changed in terms of swapping seeding. 2 to 3. Arizona State does fall to a 3 seed, but they're kind of that top 3 seed there in the UCLA regional, as you could see. Oklahoma drops to a 3 seed for me. Purdue gets in as a 3 seed, same with TCU. Virginia falls to a 3 seed. They were previously a 2 seed for me. Eastern Carolina kind of hanging on by a thread. I kept them in despite the fact that they lost their weekend. That's another thing. The American did have a tough weekend. They were looking like a slam dunk 3-bid conference, but now they don't have any teams within the top 50 in the UTSA is at 50, but that's the highest RPI in that conference. That was looking like a league that was going to get UTSA, UAB, and East Carolina in. UTSA is the auto bid at the moment for me, but UTSA they take a series loss at Memphis. East Carolina, they lost their series at home versus Rice. UAB takes a series loss at home to Charlotte. And then you do have UAB at UTSA this weekend, so some implications there. And then after Rice takes down East Carolina, they're kind of looming there at 68 in the RPI, a team that could win that conference tournament. But that conference goes from a 3-bid conference to looking like a potential 1-bid pretty fast. But I snuck East Carolina on there as one of my last teams in. And then Boston College still have them. I think their chances at hosting, I did have them as a host 2 weeks ago. But their chances are looking pretty slim. They would probably have to win their weekend series against Georgia Tech this weekend to make a case. I think they'd have to sweep to I don't even think a sweep would solidify their chances, but it would start the conversation. You would probably have to get some help from some of the teams that are hosting at the moment. Other than that, you have Wake Forest still a 2 seed. Oregon State was an interesting one because I think they are one of the highest 2 seeds. So it would make sense for them to go one of these 16, 15 seeds. But it just made sense to have them go to Oregon. I mean, how could you not put them in that regional? Oregon State, Gonzaga, San Diego State, a fun little West Coast regional there. USC still have it as a 2 seed. Ole Miss is a 2 seed. Coastal drops to his 2 seed. They are still one of my highest ranked 2 seeds. So I have them there at the Tallahassee Regional. And then Mississippi State drops to the highest ranked 2 seed for me, and have them going to Lincoln Regional. So there's your field of 64. Not much changed on it. And then next week we'll go at it again after as we're heading into conference championships across the league. So as always, I'll leave the link below to 11.7 for you to go make your own field of 64. I also have the link to my field of 64 page on the website, as well as the top 25. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Having a lot of fun talking some college ball every week, and really looking forward to seeing what else I cook up for conference championships and then tournament. Should be a lot of fun. So thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you on the next one.